take a comfort. Thank you. We'll take a comfort break. I see there are some chats here. Okay, this is okay. Truman has put up information for us, so that's starting. Okay, let's move on. All right, so the expectations coming out of this session, we're all in the industry. We've all got certain experiences, so please put up your hand. If I don't see that your hand is up, please unmute and ask to speak, because we would love to hear from you. I'm hoping that everybody has read through the material provided for the module. We will also stick as closely to the time as possible so that we don't overrun or miss certain parts of the course. Please, if you're not talking, please make sure that you're muted and participate. Okay, please ask questions. All questions are good. One, the introduction. So why are you studying this course? Who would like to put up their hands and say, give us an idea, why are we studying the course?
And perhaps just to add, Dave, so seeing that we've got some of the attendees who are already enrolled, maybe let's give the opportunity to those that are new.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know who is new and who's not new.
Okay.
So.
No. It's fine. But they know themselves. Jared, Andre, I see Nozipo, Siobhan, Penelope. Then the rest of the people will be new. Those are the only names that I'm familiar with. Thank you.
Cool. So of the people who are new to the course, first timers, what do you expect to gain from this? Stacey?
Thank you so much, Dave. As previously mentioned, that where I work, we provide credit to the supply chain sector. So I'm hoping to have an intimate understanding of the processes that are involved. That way I can understand, how best to help my clients, and we can offer tailor-made solutions to their problems. So that's why I voted for this course.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Okay, let's get into the course proper. So the course consists of 4 elements: the role of warehousing in logistics strategy, the warehouse operational procedures and processes, technology in the warehouse, and warehouse cost management and performance controls. So tonight we're going to focus on units 1 and 2. Units 3 and 4 we'll deal with on Wednesday. So as an overview, synchronization of planning and scheduling, impacts on your variability, and that results in a change in flow, which is impacts on our delivery cycles, impacts on waste reduction. A change in the cash velocity will result, and that is impacted by customer service levels, stock rotation, and expense control. And altogether, all of this leads to a change in return on investment. And our objective is always to optimize inventory levels, to grow market share, to reduce our working capital, and increase our contribution margins. So when we are going back to these roles of the 4 units over here, and we look at that in terms of everything we do. We set up a strategy. Based on that strategy, we create policies. Policies are there to guide the business and to make sure that everybody clearly understands the impact of the policy and how to apply the policy in their different areas in order to support the strategy. Your procedures or your standard operating procedures, whichever we call them in our businesses, are then derived from your policies and support your processes, everything that happens within your processes. The technology portion comes in within your strategy. Your senior executives who put your strategy together will decide on what levels of technology they want to include into the business and use within the business. And those then are supported by and support the cost management and the performance controls. So the cost management is something we will do a product costing up front, which is done at the launch of a product and is reviewed periodically in terms of standard costing, reviewed on the company's policies, and that costing will then be used as the standard against which we measure our performance. And the performance controls are there to measure how we are performing on an ongoing basis to make sure that our business maintains flexibility. I see Sipiwe has with the network due to load shedding. Stay with us, Sipiwe. Otherwise, yeah, if you need to talk, we can always talk outside of the session. So what is the supply chain? Supply chain is underpinned, as you can see, by planning. When we're planning can include forecasting. It can include, which would be independent planning. And then you've got your dependent planning, which would support your making. So within the supply chain, the entire supply chain, we will plan and we will source materials to produce according to that plan. We will then make the products according to the plan, and we will deliver them to the customers. We will also receive deliveries from our suppliers into our system against our plan. And if our customers have any returns, those returns will come in and need to be planned for. A lot of companies fall short where they don't plan on their returns. And especially those, those companies that need to add value or rework those returns, which certain industries require. If that isn't planned, it leads to huge inefficiencies within an organization. So just what sort of levels or what happens with returns? For example, a product line will be launched into the market and on a special promotion, for example. When the promotion comes to the end, that product that is still in the stores then will be collected and returned to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer will then need to store them in the warehouse until such time as they can rework them, split them back into their normal components and their normal SKUs. SKUs, stock keeping units. So where do we find supply chains with warehouses within our supply chain? Again, it depends on your industry. There are a number of industries that use warehousing. For example, if we look at those industries that bring products into the country, so our freight forwarders, they will have warehouses, collection warehouses in the country of, for example, China. They will then collect a whole lot of different materials from different suppliers together and then ship them in together so that they can manage their costs. So if we have a look at this diagram underneath here, you can see from a supplier, it would go into a warehouse. That warehouse could either belong to that supplier or it belongs to the freight forwarder, or sometimes even to the organization that is the manufacturer, if it's a multinational manufacturer. It then gets from that warehouse, it would then get issued into production where it gets manufactured. From production, it would go to the outbound warehouse, which is your finished goods warehouse. In your finished goods warehouse, you could have different policies, for example, where product gets shipped out and distributed in pallet quantities, or it can be picked from a picking phase and shipped directly to the retailer. If, for example, it comes out in pallet quantities, it would go to a distribution center. These distribution centers, again, can either belong to the company, the manufacturer, or in most cases, we now have specialized distribution centers. And these distribution centers, for example, DSV in South Africa or UTI, they specialize in the distribution of product. They will receive it from the manufacturer in pallet forms, in pallet quantities. They will then break those pallet quantities down into their picking phases, where they will pick either individual quantities or they will pick lots, for example, shrink wrap units of 6, and those will then get distributed to the customer's warehouse, to the receiving warehouse. From there, it could get broken down. For example, if we're talking in the South African context, it could go to the Dis-Chems of the world, where it goes to Dis-Chem centralized warehouse, and from there it gets broken down further for Dis-Chem to distribute to their stores. In certain cases, in certain industries, they tend to skip, especially for fresh produce. They would skip the distribution centers because of the need to deliver it on a daily basis. They skip the distribution centers and deliver directly from the factory into the customer. So what do we keep in these warehouses? Okay, anything from, depending on the industry, it could be raw materials, it could be finished goods, it could be intermediate products. For example, within a factory, you will have a work in process warehouse, specifically in the batch manufacturing industry, where you will make up the product and you will keep it in bulk form. It will then get stored until it needs to be packed off. When you want to pack it off, it then gets issued into production again and gets packed off from there into the finished goods warehouse. Also, if you look in your heavy industries, for example, your mining industries, where they need spare parts for their equipment, to keep their equipment going, these warehouses will hold down to nuts and bolts, anything from a full engine, as an example, right down to specific nuts and bolts, and will get issued accordingly. Pharmaceuticals look at specific raw materials. and from the raw materials, it's converted into the finished goods and is always stored under specific conditions in the pharmaceutical industry and according to specific regulatory requirements. Cold chain, the fresh produce that I mentioned earlier, will be stored in a cold chain, either in what we call fridges, which is below 8 degrees Celsius, or in the case of frozen foods, down to -18. In blast fridges, it can go down to -40 degrees, which then becomes a separate management discipline, that we know as cold chain. So supply chain network. If we go back in time, where supply chains were fairly simple, and we're going back to the 60s, 70s, and 80s of the 20th century, where a lot of the raw materials, etc., were supplied locally, supply chains were fairly simple. Nowadays, in the modern world, supply chains are more like honeycomb networks, where you can get multiple materials from multiple suppliers in multiple countries, all complying to the same specifications. So you could have multiple suppliers supplying into a specific plant, and then into different warehouses, through to manufacture or market, through to the market, and into either DCs or into directly into retail. It's fragmented, okay? It's very difficult to control your cost of goods. Inventory holding becomes very, very critical. And if we are working in a make-to-order environment, so for example, if we're making heavy machinery, we don't hold stock of heavy machinery, so that becomes a make-to-order. That is a push system. So the order is placed on the manufacturer. The manufacturer will then order in all the components and will manufacture that particular item. Let's say if it's a TLB or a large truck, they will then manufacture that truck and then ship it to the client. In terms of consumer goods, that's generally a pull system, and pull systems are produced generally against forecasts. Those forecasts are supplied either by the customer or are derived from sales in the retail industry. And we manufacture then according to the forecasts. We hold stock, and the stock then is called off and supplied to suppliers, supplied to the market. Okay, so why are the above questions relevant to the warehouse management? Because each of these questions, examples that I've discussed require a specific strategy to manage them. So supply chain networking covers a very wide range, okay? Number one, it's very important to understand that there needs to be relationships. In modern day society, we tend to rely very much on email communication. We don't develop a face-to-face relationship with our suppliers or with our customers. In terms of those relationships, we share a lot of data. We are interconnected and we are interdependent on one another. So there's a lot of data that is shared between customers, suppliers, and manufacturers. There needs to be visibility of that information. We need to maintain our connectivity. So, for example, tonight, some people are having a problem with their Wi-Fi connectivity because of the of load shedding, as an example, in South Africa. So we all need to be connected, and then we need to collaborate. Everybody needs to be open, share information, and work together in order to make the supply chain, the entire supply chain work. We need to be efficient and effective in what we do, and we need to be innovative in terms of our problem solving. And one of the most important areas that we need to be is we need to be focused on continuous improvement. If we don't continually improve what we do, we will stagnate and we will lose market share. Your products will stop selling and you will lose market share. So the role of warehousing in the logistics strategy. Sorry, did somebody say something? Okay, I'm going to continue. So the role of warehouse management, and I'd like to, we need to take this wider than just warehouse management, okay? It should be every member of the warehouse. The role that each member within the warehouse plays is critical to the success of the warehouse. The collaboration that I mentioned earlier between customers, suppliers, manufacturers, it needs to be within the individual people within the warehouse. Each member of that warehouse team needs to understand the bigger picture. So as for an example, they need to understand the role that they play within the warehouse, the role the warehouse plays within the greater business, and what leads to success and or failure within that warehouse. So in terms of a logistics strategy, sorry, let me just, I just want to, my apologies, I just, where are we? Come on now. I'm just going to just, my screen has stopped moving, so I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to reshare it. I don't know why I seem to have lost my notes. Can everybody see my screen? No, I'm not sharing. I need to share.
You're not sharing yet?
Yes. Sorry, I'm trying to get, there we go. I've got my Zoom meeting. I'm not a common Zoom user, so I apologize because I generally use Teams to share. Okay, can everybody see my screen again?
Yes, we can, Dave.
Okay, so let me just go back up. Okay. There we go. Okay, so we're back here. Okay, so in terms of the production logistics strategy, we need to understand how supply chains or how warehouses play the role within supply chains. So you've got a raw material, that is a warehouse. A warehouse is obviously where stock is stored, awaiting conversion. Okay, so it's not a value added responsibility, it is a cost responsibility, and because of that we need to make sure that we manage it very, very well. From your raw material warehouse, it will go into production, it gets converted to, at a certain stage, as I mentioned earlier, you could then have a work in process warehouse where you go from production into work in process. So for example, we will manufacture a product to a certain level, to a bulk level. It'll again get stored in the work in process warehouse. From there, it goes to finished goods. And from finished goods, it goes to the warehouse. It could go, in the case of fresh produce, directly from production to the consumer, or from your warehouse to a DC, to the retailer, and to the consumer. depending on the industries that we all work in. And if you think of your individual industries, you will see where you fit within this particular chain. So in terms of the logistics strategy, the route to market needs to be designed so that we clearly understand the network that we are working in and which of these channels we use in order to deliver to market. Another important point for us is location, exactly where we fit within the distribution or within the manufacturing environment in terms of our warehousing. We need to understand, for example, the current and the long-term market and product bases, where this requires accurate data, the type of goods that we are handling, the type of facility that we are working within, the inventory location and quantities, the level of technology that we're employing within our network and within our warehouses, whether we are moving in terms of unit loads, whether we are moving either full pallets or part pallets, or we are moving individual units, and the cost involved in that, the cost to land materials in South Africa, the cost to actually deliver them to market, the breakdown of that cost in terms of how we operate within the business. So within the warehouse, are we a manual warehouse? Are we a fully automated warehouse, etc.? So we'll get to some more detail on that just now. So the financial factors that we are looking at here. Sorry, just hang on. 125. So when we're looking at the financial factors, when we're designing warehouses and setting up our strategy, is what are the costs of the materials that we are bringing in? What type of manufacturing industry are we in, or warehousing industry are we in? And how does that impact financially on what we do and how we convert it? For example, if we're working in very high value items, we need to manage our stock levels very, very carefully so that we make sure that we don't overcapitalize the industry. If we are looking at industries that morph and evolve very quickly, for example, the computer industries, they are changing all the time, and technology is moving continually. So we've got to continually look at the expansion factors. How do we change our processes in order to supply the market? We need to look at communication and performance improvement. How do we communicate internally and externally? And how do we set continuous improvement programs in place to measure or to, how do we set continuous improvement programs in place to continually improve our business and improve our performance? And then the types of goods to be handled, which we have discussed to some extent in terms of what product are we delivering to the market. Another area within the strategy that we look at is, do we manufacture in-house or do we subcontract? A lot of the larger companies in industry or in the marketplace, they have a lot of products, their high value products and their high volume products, they tend to produce in-house. But when it comes to the smaller products, they tend to outsource that to specialist manufacturers or specialist warehousing organizations. so that you can then specialize in terms of moving stock. The pharmaceutical industry, for example, your manufacturers don't have their own finished goods warehouse for distribution or their own distribution centers. They rely on specialist distribution centers, and that's because of the high cost of warehousing, because it's such a specialist requirement to comply with the regulatory requirements. Pharmaceuticals, for example, have to be stored below 25 degrees Celsius and generally below 45 degrees relative humidity, even in their finished goods format. So your organizations like DSV, for example, in South Africa, they specialize in distributing. So you will then, as a manufacturer, deliver to DSV on behalf, or as a, let's say as a co-packer, we're talking specifically about contracting out. So as a co-packer, you would deliver to the likes of DSV for a specific customer, and then that DSV will manage the distribution to that to the retailers on behalf of that customer based on the customer's forecasts. So according to the customer's forecast, you deliver in bulk to DSV, and according to the same customer forecasts, DSV then delivers on behalf of the customer to the retailer stores. So what are the cost factors? In terms of outsourcing, it's less capital on the balance sheet. So you don't need to have huge distribution centers. In the case of pharmaceuticals, as I've said, huge HVAC systems, that's heating, cooling, and ventilation and air conditioning. So you don't have all of that additional equipment. Your costs are fully on profit and the loss statement, so you don't have any capital on your balance sheet. Everything goes onto your P&L. You don't need to depreciate your capital investment. It gives you a better economy of scale. You're increasing your business ratios, and there are huge tax advantages to subcontracting and also to leasing. You merely have the cost of product. So if there are any wage disputes, for example, you don't have the industrial relations risks. There's more professionalism and expertise because these companies tend to focus on specific areas within industry. And innovation and new thinking is continual within that industry because they specialize. They will tend to be more innovative within their own specific industries. Having said that, there are also disadvantages. Okay, so you cannot control your cost of manufacture as closely as you could internal, because most of the costs are fixed. We tend to, within product costing, we tend to categorize costs as fixed and labor cost used to be a variable cost, but because of people anymore, that's now become a fixed cost. But your electricity, as an example, is a variable cost because when you are not running a piece of equipment, the equipment is not drawing power. You've got a lot more hidden costs, okay, which companies don't tend to declare. And you're paying the contractor a profit. So if everybody needs to make money, so everybody adds a margin onto the product. So unless you manage your subcontractors very, very closely, you could end up paying a lot of profit. The general rule is when you are the contract manufacturer's margins are significantly lower than your marketing company's margins. And that is because they specialize in manufacture. They don't have the huge overheads that your marketing companies will have. So if you are subcontracting, again, you have less direct control on your service levels. You're reliant on your co-packer for your service levels. There could be less response to request unless you have a good relationship. And in certain industries, there is a lack of innovation because people tend to get very comfortable in what they do. The pharmaceutical industry, as an example, because of the high regulatory requirements in terms of complying in South Africa, complying to Act 101, which is your Medicines Control Act, they tend to limit the innovation because with every innovation becomes re-registration, becomes validation and qualification of processes. So all of that then adds cost. And because of that, people are reluctant to innovate. So what is cost adding versus value adding? So a cost adding is where a material will sit, for example, in a warehouse, and there is no value added to it. So the basic rule is that if you invest that money in the bank, does it give you a better return than just storing it in your warehouse? Okay. If you are adding cost to product, you are manufacturing inefficiently. So cost adding, for example, is if when you are costing your product, you work out that your product is going to take 1 hour to manufacture, but in real life, it actually takes 2 hours, then you're falling into the cost adding category rather than the value adding category. Okay, so what carefully managed. Customs compliance and regulatory compliance within that cost contribution, 50% of your staffing, of your total cost, sorry, is made up by staffing. So a lot of companies, in order to manage that, try to make sure that they don't use manual processes, that they use automated processes, and they automate. We'll discuss that a bit further on, because this also has implications that you will tend to capitalize a lot of your product. A lot of your costs will be capitalized in terms of your facilities, and you then start pushing your building costs up and your building services. So this is your breakdown generally of what your warehousing will be. And this then gives us a huge opportunity to use continuous improvement, to use lean programs as an example to remove waste and to add value to the product. So what are ways to actually reduce cost and to reduce variability or variation within the process? Decoupling points are placed within a supply chain in order to reduce the length, the effective length of the supply chain. So for example, if we're looking at the information, this information from this side would start at your forecasting and your feedback from your consumer and would move back through the entire system to your raw material supplier. Your materials will then move in the reverse direction in order to satisfy that end demand, that end customer demand. So what we do in industry is we break this up and we create buffers within these areas. And these buffers are effectively warehouses. So each of these warehouses within here decouples this information flow and decouples this materials flow so that we minimize what we call the bullwhip effect. You can see the whip gets bigger and bigger because variability adds uncertainty. And so because of the uncertainty, this negatively impacts on your supply chain and also onto your lead times. The trade-offs, there are always trade-offs within industry, and your trade-offs, I'm just getting to, okay, sorry. So your trade-offs in industry are there in order to optimize what you have. You will trade off stock holding for service levels, as an example. If you push your service levels up to the maximum, again, we'll touch on this later, then you've got to hold a whole lot more stock in order to satisfy that service level. The theory of constraints is another strategy within the warehousing environment. And the theory of constraints is a management philosophy and methodology which was developed in the 1980s. It's aimed at improving organizational performance by identifying and managing constraints or bottlenecks that limit the overall throughput and the effectiveness within a system. So the idea behind TOC is that every complex system, such as manufacturing or supply chain or warehousing or projects, has at least one constraint. So if you can imagine in your mind's eye, if you take a chain and you pull a chain and stretch it, it can only break in one area, okay, or on one link. And that is very simplistically what we call, or what we focus on in terms of TOC. Where that link will break will be your weakest link or your constraint. And that is where you focus all your efforts. So by using the TOC, we make things flow through organizations better. We get more done. We reduce the waiting times. Instead of just fixing sections of the supply chain, we tend to look at it holistically, and every improvement we make is focused on achieving the greater good. There's a methodology that gets followed where you identify the weakest link, you then exploit it. By exploiting it, we make sure that we interrogate it and we work out how we can improve it. We elevate it so that it becomes the most important step within the process. And we make sure that we optimize everything around it. And then we subordinate all else, so that in order to optimize it, we make sure that everything serves that constraint. We then focus on ways to improve that constraint until it is no longer the constraint, and then the process starts again. There are a number of books that you can read on the theory of constraints. If anybody wants to read them, please let me know, and we can talk around them. And I will gladly introduce everybody to them. Okay, so in terms of warehouse flows, layouts, and controls, okay, we need to understand that picking time and movement, we need to understand that movement, any movement within a warehouse takes time, and time is money. So when you are designing your warehouse, you want to make sure that your warehouse optimizes, firstly, all of the space, and optimizes the type of market that you are satisfying. We need to make sure that our service levels are always maintained, and that when we design for a specific service level, we are looking at things like order processing, the frequency of delivery. So if it's a high value or a high frequency delivery, for example, fresh goods, those get delivered on a daily basis. Then we make sure that we structure accordingly. We make sure that our order cycle time is optimal in terms of supporting the frequency of delivery. And we make sure that our delivery reliability is as best as we can make it. And finally, in order to close the loop, that our invoice processing is accurate and correct so that we can receive our payments on time. In industry today, payments can be anything from 30 to 120 days. And those of you that are involved in the financial side or have had exposure to it will know that there are so many different games that can get played by our customers. And a favorite one is they will pay 30 days from statement. And if your invoices come in too close to the end of the month, they tend to push them to the following month. And everything then gets carried over. And instead of paying on 30 days, they pay on 60 days, which gives them a far better advantage in terms of their working capital, but negatively impacts hugely in terms of yours. This tends to have a huge negative effect, especially if you're importing the majority of your materials, because a lot of our suppliers internationally want to be paid up front. So if you're paying for a material or a product or a component coming in from China, for example, you could be paying your money out anything 120 to 160 days ahead of receipt. So if it, for example, has a 3-month lead time, you will order it, you will only receive it 3 to 4 months later, and then you still got to convert it within your system, supply it to your customer, and when your customer pays you, you're looking at 180 to 210 days. So six to 7, maybe even 8 months down the line as to when you're getting your money back. And that makes it very difficult to maintain your service levels in order to maintain your stock levels and to do business. A lot of this, a lot of our offshoring that has happened in the late 90s, early 2000s, has negatively impacted in terms of local economies. And it's a global phenomenon, whereas where, for example, we shipped out a lot of our manufacturing and our raw materials supply to countries like India and China, and they've specialized in it. But now we're dependent on them to actually deliver materials. So your average lead time in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, for a raw material is between 3 and 4 months. They will manufacture once you've made your payment, and they will ship, then ship your product to you, and then you need to convert it as quickly as possible to finished goods. So in terms of customer forecasting, you can see how difficult it is to achieve an optimal stock level in order to either maintain a high service level or to even meet forecasts to customer. Fortunately, in most industries, common raw materials are used by multiple customers, so you tend to be able to offset. It's not that it's specific to a customer. So what is quality within the warehouse? Quality within the warehouse is very much dependent on the processes that you put in place. For example, you need to make sure that your information systems are very, very accurate. You need to make sure that your data capture is up to date and it is it's accurate, it's up to date, and it's valid in terms of what is happening within your warehouse. We measure this, for example, by customer complaints. So if we have a number of customer complaints, we then analyze those and break them down to the different functions within the warehouse to see where they could happen. Our delivery to customers are measured in terms of what we call OTIF, on time and in full delivery. So if we are delivering a product, we need to pick that product. We need to make sure that we have sufficient stock to satisfy the specific order, and then we measure that in terms of our on time and in full delivery to customers. In terms of accurate documentation goes from the point of receipt of a raw material right through to delivery and invoicing to the customer. We need to make sure again that we are regulatory compliant so that we can make sure that we don't compromise the quality of the product. And in certain industries, there are special requests. So we need to make sure that we can adhere to those special requests that our customers have. So internal processes can also influence customer perceptions. All too often our customers, and this is happening more and more these days, is our customers are auditing us. So they will send out a group of auditors, either professional auditors or certain members of their own company, to come and audit us. And they will look for certain processes and procedures. They'll make sure that our housekeeping is up to date. They'll make sure that our accident records are correct and up to date. In terms of accidents, health and safety, we are audited by the Department of Labor. So here we have our own recording, and we report into the Department of Labor on a regular basis. We need to make sure that we have a stable environment. So we get audited in terms of employee turnover. And as you will all know, the higher your employee turnover, the lower the skills level within the employees. Even specialist employees that are brought into an organization, they will take some time to actually understand the culture of the organization. It takes some time for them to learn internal processes and procedures and to understand the culture, the organizational culture. In terms of equipment downtime, we manage that by employing preventative maintenance programs. So the more automated your process is, the more PPM or preventative maintenance you're going to have to employ in order to make sure that you have equipment availability and uptime. In terms of employee skills, multi-skilling of employees, we need to manage our damages. So damages are, for example, if you have a pallet of goods and the pallet gets dropped and it contains glass bottles and the bottles get broken, that's damaged goods and that gets written off and obviously comes out of the profitability. And then we've got compliance with regulation, whether it be financial regulations, whether it be health and safety regulations, pharmaceutical regulations, and others. So what we do is we actually put key performance indicators into place to measure what happens within our environments. So, for example, in terms of housekeeping, you will have a rating of 1 to 10 in terms of good warehousing practices, and we will then measure the team as a whole and also individuals within the team. The accidents, we measure employee turnover, and all of these are measured against the management team and the employees as a whole. So why do we keep inventory? As I've mentioned earlier, it takes quite a while to bring in product from.
You can finish.
Sorry, did somebody say something?
Sorry, I forgot to mute myself. My apologies.
Oh, okay, no worries, no worries. Please feel free, if you need to ask questions, just talk, okay? So why do we keep inventory? So if we have a look at basically what I said earlier in terms of lead times, the supplier lead times from, let's say, China or India or even Europe is anything from 3 to 4 months from the point of order. So if we want to satisfy the marketplace, for example, we are supplying clothing into the market, we need to make sure that that clothing is available. If we look at it from ourselves, to take it down to a very simple level, if you look at your household, for example, you don't want to go shopping every single day on your way home just to make supper that night. So we tend to keep things keep stock in our pantries, keep stock in a freezer or in a fridge, if we're fortunate to have these household components. The same goes into a business. You want to keep your stock, your inventory at raw material level. You want to keep it at a work in process level. You want to keep it at a finished goods level. And all of this is done in order to satisfy consumer demand. If we satisfy consumer demand, we will always make sure that we have business. So if we're looking at a warehouse in terms of the design of a warehouse, an optimal warehouse, you will see you've got a certain amount of space for receiving, where we actually receive the raw materials or we receive the goods. We then have a pallet storage where we store palletized goods. We then have picking faces at different levels, either a case or a broken case picking. And then we pack it and we unitize it. So, for example, if we are selling a selection of products to a pharmacy or to a supermarket, you will have a certain number of units of tomato sauce, chutney, canned goods, which will then have to get consolidated and packed into a specific pack for shipping to a single customer. In terms of warehousing, if we are working from multiple warehouses, you will have a level of cross-docking where certain warehouses will act as intermediate storage points for other warehouses in order to support them in terms of their slow-moving stock. So centralized warehouses will hold slow-moving stock for outlying warehouses so that it's easier then to reroute them to other warehouses to satisfy customer demand. All warehouses need some form of offices. They need restrooms. We need change rooms for our staff. And so if you then add everything up, there's a huge amount of area that is required for warehousing. In reality, and I can speak within the South African context predominantly, your warehousing space is pretty much dictated to you because of the size of the factory or the size of the building that your company occupies. It could be at multiple levels, so you could be moving material between floors, but you will always have a dictated amount of space, and generally as a warehouse specialist, you've got to make that space work. So what are the challenges that we have to look at when we are designing these? One of the areas is seasonal demand. For example, certain products sell better in summer than in winter. For the ladies among us who love clothes, you will know that come the end of summer, you start shopping for your winter clothes, and the likes of Woolworths and the other clothing stores will tend to hold their winter stock in store until they in their warehouses until they move it into their stores for sale ahead of the winter season. They then need to store their summer clothing that's come out and find alternative channels while they're selling the winter clothes. You've got scarcity in supply. Certain raw materials or certain products are very scarce, specifically in certain countries. And so therefore, that scarcity tends to come with longer lead times, higher stock levels, because you hold greater stock levels in order to overcome the scarcity so that you can keep supplying to your customers. And then we have the available space that we need to fit all of this into. So we need to make sure that we optimize space as much as possible. In order to do this, what happens is during the high seasonal demand periods, there are warehouse facilities that you can rent out, or you can rent out parts of warehouses. You can subcontract it to a specialist warehouse company. And these are all different ways that we as planners need to plan our warehousing requirements over, let's call it over a year's period or the 4 seasons. In order to be able to accurately, or as accurately as possible, work out what warehousing space we need to employ some form of demand forecasting. So forecasting, as a rule, the minute you complete a forecast, generally it's wrong. Okay, there's forecasting is a very inaccurate science. It tends to be, to a large part, subjective. And where it is objective based on statistical forecasting techniques, it tends to rely on certain information and certain trending that happens that needs to happen within the marketplace. If there's a sudden change within the marketplace, or if consumers get scared off on a certain product, it has a huge impact coming all the way back to the actual manufacturer and to the warehousing, and it can impact negatively all the way back to raw materials. An example that I can cite to you was within the pharmaceutical industry. If you remember going back into COVID negatively affected a number of industries where industries' demand dropped significantly. Within certain areas of the pharmaceutical industry, it had the reverse effect. Immune products, because everybody was trying to protect themselves against COVID, the demand for immune products skyrocketed. So what happened was everybody, all the manufacturers and the marketing companies were placing huge orders onto their factories and onto contract manufacturers. In turn, this led back to raw material, demand for raw material, huge increase in prices because of supply and demand and scarcity. And what happened was a company that I was involved with, working with, went from a single shift to a 3-shift operation in the space of 3 months in order to satisfy demand. This lasted for about 9 to 10 months until such time as the vaccines became available. And as people started going through the vaccine process, so they started realizing that they no longer needed the immune products. And almost overnight, demand ground to a halt. And where certain companies and some of the larger companies within the immune industry were demanding huge products, suddenly they started pushing orders out. And that had a huge negative impact on right from the retailer all the way back to the raw material supplier. And a number of companies actually went out of business because of this. So that is the impact of getting forecasting wrong. So to round up the module, okay, some of the decisions indicated could include any or some of the following. How does the warehouse location decision affect the rest of the logistics system? So just to discuss that briefly, if you have a look at the greater Gauteng area or any of the areas, the outlying areas, the majority of the warehousing areas are situated around the points of entry or in centralized hubs within the larger cities. And these then tend to support the smaller areas and the outlying areas. The products kept, as I've mentioned, you tend to hold slow-moving products in more centralized areas so that you don't have to, you can minimize the amount of cross-docking. We tend to hold products at subcomponent level rather than at finished goods level in order to optimize the finished product. The layout within the warehouse, we optimize for best flows, and we'll get into that more in Unit 2. In terms of the strategy, we need to decide, do we manage our own warehouse or do we outsource the warehouses? Do we collaborate with suppliers and or customers in terms of using common warehouses? And what inventory policies do we follow? Do we turn stock regularly? A certain measure that we could use is stock turns. So do we turn our stock over regularly in terms of keeping low stock levels and running multiple orders from suppliers? Or do we order over longer periods and hold high stock levels? Do we hold our stock in finished goods, or do we hold our stock at intermediate level, or do we hold our stock in raw materials? These are all questions that get asked and we need to ask when we're putting strategies together. Okay, are there any questions? I know I've gone through this quite a lot. If you have and you are having connectivity, please type something in. Type something into the chat box, or please ask questions. So let's have a quick 5-10 minute questions and answer session. Okay, I don't see any questions coming up. Shall we take it's now 7:30, so we're an hour and a half into our session. Let's take a 10-minute break, and let's get back at 7:40 or 20 to 8. Is everybody okay with that?
Oh, good, Dave.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, all right. So yeah, let's take well, so it's going to be a 12-minute break, and let's be ready to continue at 20 to 8 or 7:40.
Great.
Warehouse operational procedures and processes. There are, in terms of planning and organizing and control, okay, you've got these 5 general areas that are critical to the success of the warehouse. Your goods receiving, that point that you will receive your raw materials, and it's the start of your documentation process. This sets the tone for everything within the warehouse. The accuracy of the information is critical. For example, when you are receiving it, making sure that your documentation or what you capture in your system reflects both what is in your documentation and your physical stock. So as a rule, when you are receiving goods into your organization or into your warehouse, you should be doing a physical count of the stock, and also checking that into the delivery notes and making sure that when you're capturing it into your warehousing management system, that you're capturing it incorrectly or correctly, not incorrectly. So why I'm saying that capturing it is so important. If you capture something incorrectly or you get it wrong, okay, it's going to impact on your stock levels going forward. So when you reaching the end of that batch of product, you could end up running short, or you could end up with too much. So it's dependent on proper planning and execution of that plan. Also scheduling of receipts, deliveries, and collections. So you hear me talking about planning and then scheduling. A lot of organizations and individuals tend to conflate the two concepts and consider them the same thing. Planning, we need to see, planning is a higher level, and it's normally done at a bulk level. So for example, you plan for a month or you plan for a week. But when you are scheduling, you schedule down to the specific receipts coming into your warehouse. So your communication to your suppliers will be giving them delivery windows during which to deliver to your goods receiving warehouse, so that you can actually control what you are receiving. You can control the rate at which you are receiving and capturing information into your system. Consistency is the key. We want to make sure that we don't get rushed or pushed through any one transaction, because that's when we make mistakes. And we want constant communication, both within the organization and also between ourselves and our suppliers. An important area of communication is, once the delivery note is receipted, is moving that information through your ERP system to your financial module to make sure that finance is clearly understands what needs to be done, what needs to be paid, and what doesn't need to be paid or gets delayed based on certain payment terms. So in terms of storage, the warehouse layout design is designed to optimize space and efficiency. When we're doing this, we need to differentiate between fast-moving stock, medium-moving stock, and slow-moving stock. We also need to differentiate between high-value items, medium-value items, and low-value items. Each one of them has a strategy of its own, and each one of them is stored differently, physically stored differently within the warehouse. Order picking. So this is generally industry dependent and has different levels of complexity. If we are picking, for example, if we are a specialist distribution company, we will be picking at finished goods levels based on forecast demand, which is independent demand, and we will then get orders from our from our customers, or from our customers' customers sometimes. And by that I mean, if I am DSV, for example, my customer would be a company like Bayer or Adcock Ingram. And what will happen is the Dis-Chems of the world, the retailers, will order through Adcock Ingram, but directly onto DSV. So DSV will be picking product for the retailer at the end of the day. Also, another example is in a manufacturing environment, where a batch document is issued to your raw materials warehouse, and your raw materials warehouse then picks specifically according to that batch document, and then the raw materials get moved into the production environment. So those are different ways of order picking and storage of the materials. In terms of dispatch, we will then consolidate when dispatching at, again, different areas or different industries, different levels of dispatch. For example, those companies that use a specialist distribution center or DC will always dispatch in pallet loads. So it's fairly simple. It's the most simple form of dispatch. Other companies will deliver directly to the retailer, and they will be picking either at single unit level or at what we call shrink wrap unit level, which is generally 6s or 12s. And in dispatch, again, the closing of the documentation loop is so critical, because that goes into the invoicing of your customers. And if you get that wrong, as I mentioned earlier during the strategy discussion, you can then negatively impact on your company's cash flow, because your customers will end up paying you late. And late payment means a reduction in cash flow, which means you don't have the available money to purchase replacement materials. Space and equipment. The space you have is dictated by the company's location, the company's circumstance, the size of the company, the age of the company. Sometimes a number of companies are based in the older industrial areas, which are no longer centralized hubs because of the decentralization that's happened within the business environment. And so the equipment we use and the space we have needs to be optimized significantly. Okay, sorry, bear with me. Okay, so in terms of the warehouse design, there are certain basic designs that can be followed. For example, the U-shaped design here. We receive the material into receiving. It then goes through a process of put away where it gets binned. What happens in binning is that on your warehouse management system, you will allocate a pallet of material or a drum of material, whatever the storage unit is, the stock keeping unit is, you will allocate that to a bin, and then it will be placed in a specific position within your warehouse. If it's on pallet storage, we then have the storage and retrieval system. How do we put the pallet in? Where exactly in your storage bays, your racking, does the pallet go? If we have case picking, from a picking perspective, how do we then pick? How do we store the individual cases or shippers of product? How do we pick it? How do we then sort and accumulate so that you can get multiple loads together for a common customer? And then how do we then unitize it and ship it? At the same time, the same warehouse could be a centrally located warehouse that is used for cross-docking. And in receiving that, there needs to be a special area where cross-docked materials get stored so that they're easily accessed when your interlinks come in to collect. In other industries, you have a straight-through flow design where from your supplier, it goes into your warehouse or your distribution center and is immediately, or after a slight delay, sent off to the customer in the same format. So that's two basic designs. In terms of your modular design over here, and you've got multiple disciplines within the same warehouse. So over here, for example, here's your cross-docking. From a modular perspective, here's your continuous replenishment. So these are tend to be your high movement items. You've got your regular turnaround products. These are generally products that are in the mature and the growth phase, and they tend to be regular, far more stable. As we see here, conventional order or selected by store. And then your low volume or slow stock turn products. These ones tend to be moving toward the end of their product life. They could be ongoing products that have a use in industry, but generally the stock levels are kept low and your stock turns are generally a lot higher. By stock turns being higher, I mean that your stock turns are lower, which means it sits on your shelf for longer than normal. The higher the stock turn, the quicker you're turning over your stock. So what types of storage system, or what will the type of storage system selected have an impact on? Okay, so if we have a look at storage systems, there are multiple different types of storage systems, the way that we do it. For example, if we're storing grain or liquid products, etc. For example, for those of you who follow cricket and have been watching a bit of the Ashes series between England and Australia, it's been played in Birmingham at Edgbaston. And not to get you into cricket, but if you watched some of the scenes, you will see that there are these metal cage frames next to the cricket field, right outside of the stadium. And those are bulk storage units for gas. So it's almost like inflatable balloons that as they fill them up with gas, so they fill up within that frame. And as the gas then gets consumed or gets shipped out, so it deflates. These are grain silos that you can see on here. You also get for liquid bulk, oils, for example, get stored, petroleum, the different areas within the petroleum industry, your bulk crude incoming into the port gets stored, and then it gets stored at different levels and leading to your petrol stations or your service stations. So you've got your different grades of petrol, diesel that have to be stored, and also your paraffins and your alcohols at the end of the day. For example, loose item storage in shippers, they can be stored on the ground if they're in crates. They tend to get held on the ground level. Also, if the unit weight is very high and your racking can't support it, because your racking has limits in terms of the weight that they can carry. Pallet storage systems we tend to be able to store them within racking, and I'll show you a better photograph of the racking just now. And for smaller items, we have smaller bins that we tend to store stuff in. Just to go back to the pallets, where one full pallet is stored in a pallet racking system, that would classify as a bin, and within your warehouse management system, that bin would have a number. So when you are picking product, at whatever level you're picking, you go into your software and you select, and if your software is set up correctly in terms of your stock rotational principles, you will pick the oldest stock, either by delivery date or by batch number, to use first. And then your non-standard loads, such as long loads, can also get stored either on the ground or on racking within your storage area. So what are the factors that impact on the choice of a storage system? Okay, the nature and the characteristics of the good and the unit loads held, the effective utilization of the building volume, whether it be horizontal floor space or height. It may, as I mentioned earlier, be a multiple story building. In terms of your older buildings, tend to be multiple floors that stock gets stored on. It's a matter of having good access to stock. So your fast moving goods would generally be stored closer to your picking face and lower down. Your slow moving, your very slow moving items would be stored at the highest racks. Compatibility with information systems requirement, making sure that you have set your systems up correctly so that your systems very accurately reflect physically what is happening on your shop floor or within your warehouse. The maintenance of stock conditions and integrity. So stock rotation is very important. Stock rotation stops financial write-offs, and there should be, in a very well-managed warehouse, there should be no stock write-off. You should be able to use all of your stock, and use all of your stock before it expires. And that is generally one of the measures that people are held to. Personnel safety, because a lot of warehouses are multiple story, have racking systems. So personnel safety is very, very important. And then obviously your overall system costs. We need to make sure that whatever we do is cost effective, not necessarily cheap, because cheap is not always good, but cost effective is good. Some other elements that affect your choice of system is space, your fire protection risks and requirements, depending if you're working with hazardous materials, your handling equipment. So if you're working in a very high labor cost environment, like Europe, for example, where labor is very expensive, they tend to go for automated systems. And then you need to include your high maintenance costs, because the more automated equipment you have, and obviously then you need a tighter preventative maintenance program to make sure that you keep everything fully functional and have equipment available at all times. The levels of existing staff and staff training and experience. This, I can't express how important this is sufficiently. Staff training is one of the most important areas, and you have to make time for staff training. So when you are scheduling your workloads within your warehouse, scheduling for preventative maintenance is important. It needs to be part of your schedule, and also staff training needs to be part of your schedule. The more well-trained your staff, the less prone they are to mistakes, and basically because of that, the less damage that you will have, and the more reliable your information system will be. So materials handling equipment, what type of materials handling equipment do we use? Depending on your industry, you may have heavy crane systems. So if you're working in the heavy component industry, where you're fabricating motor vehicles or trucks or even large componentry, you will have crane systems to move stuff around. If you're moving bulk, for example, if you look at the harbors, if any of you have seen on television, or if you're fortunate enough to see it live, going into the containerization areas within harbors, you will see the huge cranes that they use to move the containers around, whether they're 20-foot containers or 40-foot containers. They have these huge cranes that pick them up and move them and stack them. You've then got manual trays, which are generally used either in picking faces or when issuing product into manufacturing environments. You've got power trucks or tractors or forklifts or reach trucks that sit in this category. So when you're moving product, palletized product in your warehouse, and you're moving it into high bays or medium bays, you're generally using reach trucks. If you're moving product around ports or harbors, or even when you see at the airports, a good example of the motorized and powered trucks at airports when they're loading our luggage onto aircraft or unloading from aircraft and bringing it back into the terminal for collection. There's a high usage of powered trucks. The driverless trucks tend to operate within the more automated warehouses. For example, in Europe, I've been fortunate enough to see what they call dark warehouses. There are one or two examples in South Africa now, where the warehouse, they call it a dark warehouse, effectively because there's no need for any lighting systems, because they are all fully automated, run by computers, and there are no personnel moving around in them. And so these they run on pre-programmed systems, and they tend to operate fully off a computerized system operated from a centrally located control room. Manual handling will always be, there'll always be a place for manual handling in terms of moving stuff into your picking faces. Even in places like the Amazon distribution centers or locally in the Take-A-Lot distribution centers, although a lot of the movement is done by driverless systems, there is still a huge role played by individuals in terms of either doing the final packing of the product into boxes and sealing the boxes, capturing of the information, whether it be manual capture on a keyboard or scanning systems. There is still a lot of manual handling that happens within these systems. Robotics, this tends to happen within the highly automated warehouses. This, for example, over here, this little unit is a unit that carries totes around in the Amazon type warehouses where they move the totes around. And if you Google if you Google Amazon warehousing systems, you'll be able to pick up some of the videos on how these systems work. So forklift trucks, or different examples of forklift trucks. You've got counterbalance forklift trucks. You've got reach trucks. So a forklift generally can pick up a pallet, it can tilt it backwards and forwards, and it can lift it up or down. It requires the vehicle to move forward or backwards to actually place it into a bin. Whereas a reach truck over here, you can park the reach truck at a point and you move the forks in and out in order to place stuff. This allows you to move in a much tighter area than your standard forklift does. Narrow aisle trucks, there are special trucks for narrow aisles. You've got here this in the narrow aisle truck, the top section over here tends to be able to rotate. So here, and to move backwards and forwards. So your truck itself doesn't have to turn through 90 degrees to be able to position something into a bin. The truck, the operator down here actually moves the pallet from left to right, pulls it out of here and then brings it down, or lifts it up and moves it in and out. In a lot of warehouses in South Africa, we still use a lot of manual pallet jacks, or pallet trucks as they're called, and we use this to move pallets around or to move boxes of product around, either in our manufacturing environments or in our warehouses. There's a lot of things that we need to take into account when we are looking at different equipment. Okay, we need to look at the load factor, for example. So the load factor is what type of products are you moving and how much do they weigh? Because that will depend on the type of equipment that you're going to use. Another factor is lift height. I mentioned earlier about fast moving, medium moving, and slow moving products and the different areas within warehouses that they are stored. So your lift height is important. A reach truck, for example, can lift up to 11 meters. So you can go 4 to 5, sometimes 6 stacks high within a warehouse. Certain of the specialist warehouses go that high. Generally, your general warehouses go up to about four levels up, and your forklifts can get sized accordingly. So you get different types of reach trucks for this, for your narrow aisles or your wide aisles. Obviously, if we just go back one slide to this forklift, this is for narrow aisle trucks, so that the forklift does not have to turn. A lot of these times in the narrow aisles, these forklifts actually run on rails, so that there's no chance of them hitting any one of the bins during operation. Special attachments that may be required on your equipment. For example, if you are picking up different types of pallets, an ISO pallet, for example, has different dimensions to a Euro pallet. You have different racking width for each of those pallets. So you would require special attachments or different fork lengths to be able to store all of those accordingly, especially if you're working with multiple types of pallets. Certain of the specialist houses specialize on a pallet type. So when you're delivering to them, you have to either deliver everything on an ISO pallet, which is 1 meter by 1.2 meter, or on an ISO pallet, which is generally 900 by, I think it's 900 by 1.2 meters, or 900 by 600 in certain areas. So warehouses will specialize in a certain pallet dimension, and they will build their racking accordingly. Fuel types, it's important to understand you get diesel operated forklifts, you get gas operated forklifts, you get battery operated forklifts. Now, each of them has a use. You can't use diesel, and you don't really want to use gas within a closed environment, because each of those, they are fossil fuels and they give off a level of carbon monoxide, which is obviously detrimental to our health. And so you don't want to use any of those, and it's actually illegal these days to use those forklifts within closed environments. So generally what we use is we use battery operated forklifts, and it's very important to make sure that our battery lives are correct and our batteries are very well maintained. So you get charging bays for your batteries, and your forklifts are charged periodically, and your battery life is managed by your level of charge. Just an important thing to note here is when you are docking into a charging bay, generally you will notice the battery charging bays have extraction hoods, and that is because hydrogen is generated during the charging process. And hydrogen is highly flammable. So you don't want to get a buildup of hydrogen during your charging periods. Again, when you're looking at equipment, you want to look at reliable equipment. You want to look at your after-sales service. You want to look at certain equipment you get is backed up by service level agreements with the suppliers or the service providers. Depending on the age of the equipment that you have, generally you have an aftermarket service provider that will come in and service your equipment and maintain it. And then what you do in order to ensure your productivity and your efficiencies are maintained, you make sure that you put in a service level agreement with the supplier or the service provider that controls their turnaround times. So if you have a breakdown and you call them out, they have to come out within a certain time period. They need to repair your machine within a certain time period. If they can't, for example, they need to provide an alternative machine for the period that they are servicing your machine. So all of that needs to be considered when you are looking at specifying certain equipment. In terms of your after sales, I mentioned earlier about preventative maintenance programs. You want to make sure that even when your equipment is down for servicing by a service provider, it still needs to go into your preventative maintenance program because it is not available for use. So it's an important point to note that preventative maintenance is not only stuff that you own and you maintain, but it's every bit of equipment that you use within your facility, because it can't be available and be maintained at the same time. So selection criteria. So what are you using a specific piece of equipment for? Okay, it needs to be fit for purpose. Is it being used indoors? Is it being used outdoors? Is it being used for lifting stock to high levels? Or are you moving stock from point A to point B within your warehouse at ground level? Are you working in narrow aisle environments, or are you working in wide aisle environments? All of this dictates the type of equipment that you want to purchase for that purpose. I cite the example again of the narrow aisle where we saw that reach truck. For that type of environment, you also get walk behind reach trucks. So if it is a very small area, you get different size of walk behind reach trucks that your personnel can walk behind and manage in a much tighter environment to move stock around, whether it's what we call break bulk, box by box by box, or whether it's palletized boxes. Another requirement is the level of maintenance that is required. We want to make sure that the equipment we get is robust, is easy to maintain. So generally, the less automated, the more manual products tend to be easier to maintain and have shorter maintenance periods. And the more complex equipment tends to have a much longer maintenance period. But all of these need to be planned. Another selection criteria is, what can your business afford? You don't want to overcapitalize. So you don't want to tie up unnecessary money in equipment that's going to take years to depreciate. You want to make sure that you get only what you need and utilize that to the fullest. The more manual your process, the less maintenance you require on automated equipment, but the counter to that is the higher the labor requirement. So the more manual, the more people, the less equipment, or the less automated equipment. The same goes in reverse, that the more automated your warehouse, the more maintenance programs you need, the higher your cost of maintenance is going to be. Somebody want to ask a question? Sorry, I can't hear. I can hear somebody is talking, but I can't hear what you're saying. Are you asking a question? I can't see anything on the...
Okay, no, I think it's Eric. Eric, can you please mute or speak a little bit louder if you're asking a question?
Okay, I'm going to mute Eric.
Noise, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I've muted Eric. If you want to ask, please unmute yourself. Don't take it personally, okay? Okay, moving on. So adjustable pallet racking. This over here is an example of pallet racking. We've all seen it in our different warehouses. Often we see it without the wooden slats in between. Because if it's designed specifically for a pallet, the two orange horizontal beams are spaced exactly to take up the supports, the structural supports on the pallets themselves. And therefore, you don't need the horizontal slats. If you are storing smaller items, then you need this kind of shelving inside. Just to note that in certain industries, the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, you are not allowed wood. Okay, so these intermediate slats can't be wood, they need to be metal. And that is to stop splinters from going into the raw material, through the bags or through the boxes, and ending up in the finished product. Drive-in racking, so you've got this drive-in racking that you can drive your forklift or your reach truck into. A lot of drive-in racking is also on rollers. So it's angled slightly so that you can load it in the front here and it rolls down the rollers. And then when you are extracting it, you will come and extract from this side. If you get your stock rotation, or if you get your batches right and your lots correct, this makes stock rotation a lot easier than multiple stacking. Live mobile or live powered racking, these racks are actually motorized and move. You may have seen it in documentation warehousing, where you can open up certain racks to access information, to access files, and then you close them up, you compact them to create more space. And then high bay racking over here, which is generally your slower moving items, you can stack up to 7 high in your racking. So when you are deciding on what storage equipment to use here, you must always consider what is being stored, whether it is pallet size, the construction, what industry you're working in, okay, what handling equipment you currently have. Because every time you redesign your racking, you don't want to have to go and lay out capital to purchase new equipment. So within the storage area, it's your stock movement versus people movement. So if you have a look in this high bay area, for example, you don't want to, well, you've got to be careful because a lot of this is for automated equipment movement and you don't have areas for people movement. So you've got to exercise extreme caution, allowing people to move around your warehouse, also to access your warehouse. So your stairways leading into your warehouse, doorways leading out of your warehouse always need to be open or have access to and are prevented. When your people are working within these warehouses, you need to make sure that they have the correct PPE, personal preventative equipment. For example, in a warehouse, you will always be wearing a reflective vest. People will always be wearing hard hats in case something falls from a high level and lands onto them. You will have your emergency exits clearly marked and open, and you will have your fire prevention equipment. Warehouses like your high bay warehouses will always have in-rack systems or fire prevention systems. So your water hydrants will always be exposed within the racking for high racking systems in case there is a fire and it needs to be extinguished. And then you will also look at your specialist equipment for handling materials. So if you're working with highly flammable materials or acids, for example, where you need special face masks, special breathing equipment, special gloves, all of that needs to be made available. Need to look at what materials you are storing and the speed of movement. So how quickly do I need to be able to get to a specific product, to pull that product either to a picking face or to take it to my point of dispatch. So when we're looking at storage space, if we're looking at adjustable pallet racking, okay, generally taking up 30 to 40%. Your speed is fairly good. Your stock rotation is easy. Stock stability is easy. Picking access is good. Okay, and then you can start going down here where you've got your high bay racking. 70 to 90% of high bay warehouses can be built higher than other warehouses, subject to planning permissions. So as I've said, you need fire prevention systems. You need special dispensation from the Department of Labor. You need to make sure that your council, the area that you built in, that the council approvals are all there for that type of racking. So if you're looking at live powered racking, where you can move the physical racks from one side to the next, you can see that's got excellent stock rotation. One way, as I explained to you, when you're putting it in the one side and out the other, your stock stability is fairly limited. Your order picking access is good. Your mechanical handling and equipment is generally specialized or bespoke, whereas here on adjustable pallet racking, you use standard equipment. For drive-in racking is standard. High bay would be bespoke because you've got to raise it to those extremely high levels. So in terms of best practice considerations, you want to have a look at what you are storing in terms of pallets or storage units. Are we supporting boxes? Is the product heavy? Do you have to move stuff fast? Do you need access to it? Do you have, if you go back to the design of certain of the warehouses, where you have cross-docking facilities, or you have multiple disciplines within the warehouse, you tend to need to have different storage areas allocated, as indicated in this picture and over here, all your different storage areas. If your materials that you have require specialist requirements, whether they are flammable, batteries, for example, electronic equipment, everything needs to be stored in a certain way. If you have perishable goods, how do you store perishable goods versus non-perishable goods? And then obviously best practice considerations from a safety aspect. Safety is becoming more and more mainstream as we evolve, and as the requirements through industry evolve. I can remember going back to my youth when I was a young engineer. The safety requirements were, a lot of them were left up to the individual and were considered a logical approach. Okay, whereas today, if you have a look at your safety systems, they no longer rely on the individual just being trained and having a training record. Over and above that, you need to make sure that every possible risk that person is exposed to is mitigated. So it's not just a matter of training the people and making sure they've got the safety equipment. It's now making sure that the environment they work in, as far as practically possible, is a safe environment. And when it's where it's not a safe environment, risk assessments have to be done in order to identify risks and to publish them, and then to manage them. So you've got your the different warehouse applications. Okay, you've got your order picking, where you are picking an order for a retail store, or so it's individual items, as I've mentioned before, or it's in shrink units, or it's in shippers, orders picking by pallet. We need to make sure that our order picking facilities are correct. Your order picking facilities, whichever principle you are using, will always be closest to your dispatch area and closest to your collation points and your data capturing points, because that is the stock that moves the fastest. And one of the design criteria when you are designing your warehouse is that you want to minimize your movement. You want to make sure that your people move as little as possible, as quickly as possible. That then ensures efficiency. So your automatic guided vehicles, for example, are generally in your highly automated high bay warehouses, your dark warehouses. You want to make sure that they are controlled and automated and managed as closely as possible. You want to make sure that your labor requirements are kept in controlled areas and are managed in terms of your automated and your robotic equipment, so that nobody is unnecessarily exposed to hazardous environments. Your product requirements that your product requires. Okay, Osman, so what do you think of the revolution? Osman, it has its place. Automated smart warehouses have their place, specifically if you are managing fast-moving, repetitive stocks. So if there's not a lot of picking, I know for a fact that Colgate-Palmolive in Germany has a dark warehouse in Hamburg where they actually pick raw materials for their production environments from. In South Africa, DSV have a dark warehouse which picks products for supply to store. So they pick down to a shrink wrap unit, but the whole automated system and the computer warehousing system behind it is integral to smart warehousing systems. And if you get your software wrong, or you get your hardware that is linked to that computer system wrong, it becomes an absolute nightmare to manage. And that's one of the reasons why your average companies don't go for it. So yeah, you talk about the revolution of automated smart warehousing. I know of dark warehouses that have been around since the early 90s. So that's 40 years already have been around and have been working and are very successful. And I know of some that have been implemented within the last 4 to 5 years that have collapsed and almost collapsed businesses and have needed to be pulled out back to semi-automated systems. I hope that answers your question. So your product requirements depend, certain of our products are light sensitive, for example, so they would be in dark warehouses, high moving stuff, as I've said to Osman. Your product characteristics would determine how you can automate. So for example, if you are moving big tractor units around, there wouldn't be a high level of automation of movement of the finished goods, for example, because the products don't handle, can't handle that level of automation. Handling and packaging, the more packaged the product is, the easier it is to automate. If you have special requirements, for example, if you are moving explosives or you are moving fuel, your specialized requirements tend to have a specialist automation level. And then temperature controlled, as I mentioned earlier, where you've got temperature controlling, for example, if you are moving fresh produce around, your warehouses Well, first of all, your production facilities need to be temperature controlled. Your warehouses will be temperature controlled. Even down to your transport vehicles will be temperature controlled to ensure that the produce is kept possible. In all of these areas, your staff training is absolutely important, of the highest importance from a health and safety perspective, also from an ergonomics perspective. You need to make sure that your staff are multi-skilled so that they can handle a lot of different areas efficiently. You need to make sure that everybody is well versed in the quality standards and the requirements to maintain those quality standards, and also that people understand the levels of financial control that are required. A lot of organizations tend to compartmentalize their staff, whether it be in warehousing, whether it be in production or in administrative roles. And because they are compartmentalized, they're not exposed to the greater business. So they don't understand the systemic approach. And because of that, a lot of mistakes are made through a lack of understanding of the impact of my actions on the rest of the organization. In a lot of areas, if we take the analytical approach, in a lot of areas, we will set up key performance indicators and measures specific to that department. But when we step back and we look at the greater organization, we're actually end up driving our personnel's performance in a way that is detrimental to the organization itself. It may optimize a specific area, but it has a detrimental effect on the greater organization. So these are all areas that we need to make sure that we clearly understand. So when we talk about training of people, people should always be exposed to the greater organization. And I'm not talking specialist training, I'm talking a level of understanding. And people need to understand why they do certain things and why certain practices are expected of them. So inventory control, okay, and the basic concepts. So we need to balance our stock levels. If we need to balance our stock levels, sorry, against demand, taking the holding cost into account. What is the cost of the actual material or the product or component itself? Okay, because the inventory itself is the major cost of holding stock. If you get stock rotation wrong, you can end up with material expiring. This happens quite a lot in the food industry, in the perishables industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, food and beverages, where if we don't do correct batch control or lot control and use the oldest lots first, we tend to end up having to write off because that stock becomes useless. The stock perishes and it can't be used in production. A lot of the picking systems within your materials warehouses have a lot control component. And so if you set it up correctly and you support it with the correct technology like scanning systems, which we will talk more about on Wednesday, you can manage your stock very closely. One of the issues is if your binning systems, which we'll also talk about, is not absolutely correct, your staff can take shortcuts and bin the stuff in the incorrect bins, which can also happen if you just have a total lack of discipline, by the way, and a lack of understanding, again, of the impact of our actions. And then that stock gets lost within the system because the system will say it's in bin A when it's in bin C or D. And then it gets lost, and then it's highly likely that it'll expire and then have to get written off. And that becomes a huge financial loss. You need to have a look at capital versus operational costs. So capital being the cost of inventory. So in order to lower operational costs, we hold higher stock levels so that we can move our stock slower, so that we can employ less people, so that we can have less equipment and less systems or fewer systems. And we need to manage those costs and identify the associated cost with each one of those areas before making the complete decision. You may have heard of ABC analysis, which is basically a ranking of your inventory, your A items being your high value items and high usage items, and then B is medium and C is low usage, low value or very slow usage items. And they're each managed slightly differently. You obviously want to look after your high turnover and your high value stock far more closely than your slow moving stock. And basically, if you read up on ABC analysis, you'll see it's based very much on the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule, where 80% of your cost is carried within 20% of your items. And basically, that means effectively that your high value stock, although it physically makes up a small portion, needs to be managed far more closely than your low value items, which would make up, in the rough rule of thumb, your 80% of your items. We also need to look at service costs. So service costs are management fees if we are subcontracting, things like insurance, health and safety if you don't have an internal health and safety system, the use of consultants. A lot of time the use of consultants becomes a hidden cost and is not taken into product costing at all. So you need to look at that. And then in terms of risk management, you need to look at damage to your product. If somebody bumps a rack, causes a rack to fall over, or drops a product, or even just bumps a box, or I've seen a case within the last couple of weeks where somebody wasn't focused on what they were doing and drove the forklift into the back of a customer truck. And then you end up having to pay excess on insurance, or you end up having to cover it on your own insurance, which then pushes your insurance fees and your operating costs up. So demand classification. Demand classification is one of two. You get independent demand and you get independent demand. So independent demand is your finished goods, generally your finished goods, and is based on customer forecast, which is in turn based on consumer spend. Your dependent demand is those materials that constitute or make up a finished good. So for example, if we're making a cake, the cake itself, the sale of the cake or the number of cakes we make is based on forecasting independent demand, but the amount of flour or flavorant or baking, or what do you call it, self-raising flour or vanilla essence or whichever raw material that we purchase that goes into that cake becomes a dependent demand, because it's dependent on the number of cakes that we have to manufacture within our environment. Forecasting. Forecasting is a subject all on its own, and it can become highly complex, and you can end up spending far too much time and forecasting and analyzing. And as I mentioned earlier, as a general rule of thumb, forecasts are always wrong. The minute you finish a forecast, and you place it into your system, you know that some consumer out there has changed their mind. And for me, I always use the example of where forecasting always changes, in that if you go to a store and you're looking to buy a bottle of tomato sauce, whether it be your local retailer or in the townships, go to a spaza, and the spaza doesn't have stock, you don't place an order and wait for them to get the stock and go back and collect it and pay for it. You will just go to another shop. Okay, so for them, forecasting is critical to get it right as to what consumer demand is, and then that is supported by their stock holding. So if your level of forecasting is very low, your level of stock holding needs to be a lot higher. Your stock movement on a regular basis is supplemented by your safety stock, which I will talk to just now. But just to get back to the forecasting, reliability of forecasting depends on where we are within the product life cycle. So if we are in the introductory stage, we've launched a product, and the product tends to be taking off well within the market, okay, we will always end up with low stocks and high demand, and we will be expected to replenish very quickly. So there's a lot of focus on bringing in stock and holding stock at raw material levels so that we can convert it to the finished goods and ship it out to customers. Once the launch phase is over, we go into the growth phase where sales become predictable. Okay, and when sales become predictable, forecasting becomes a lot easier. And what we start doing then is we start focusing on the cost management of the product. In this initial stage, it's more important to get the product out to market, because you want to capture the market. You want to make sure that you buy the consumer, and the consumer ends up becoming committed to your product and ends up buying your product on a regular basis. So cost management in this point isn't as important as it becomes in the growth stage and the maturity stage. So in growth stage, you start working off your trade-offs between cost and service can be realized, and you start focusing very much on your cost and getting your production efficient, holding your stock levels at only the correct level. Here you decide what service level you are going to introduce into your business, so that you can make sure that you hold the correct level of stock to achieve that service level. In the maturity stage, your competitors start catching up to you. So you start getting, if you're selling a chocolate bar, everybody starts selling a very similar chocolate bar and starts competing against you. And your demand for your product starts decreasing, because the consumer starts looking at competitive products. And then your effectiveness of your operations becomes critical, and your focus on cost and efficiencies needs to be focused on at the highest level in production. The amount of stock you hold needs to be trimmed down to the bare minimum. When you start getting into the declining stage, so in the case of computers, where your computers start aging, they get to 4 or 5 years old, and there's already 3 new HP models out there on the market, you start actually cutting your stock levels right down, because you know you're not going to sell that product anymore, and you only hold components. So your strategy on stock holding changes from finished goods to component level, so that you can support that for a certain life in the market. And you minimize your risks and you cut your costs. So in terms of cross-docking again, you would be holding this kind of stock in central locations only, and then shipping out to your outlying DCs and to your outlying retailers on demand. You wouldn't be doing it on a regular basis. Continuous improvement and optimization plays a key role in the life of products. So you can see the different stages that we've discussed, how optimization and efficiency changes. So Nellie's got a question. What can one do to set the right service level at, say, 96%? So you need to, Nellie, you need to have a look at what your level of forecasting is, what your forecasting accuracy is. Okay, what your demand, if it's a high moving product, it becomes easier to manage. But there is a rule where you need to have certain stock levels to achieve certain percentage service levels. Okay, so if you're having a look statistically, and I would need to brush up, but I will brush up on this for Wednesday's discussion, and I'll go into this in a bit of detail on Wednesday. I'll take just a sidestep. For example, to be above 95% confidence level statistically, okay, you need to make sure that you have 3 times the stock that you would hold for a 92% level. It's based on your confidence levels, and if any of you have studied statistics, you get 1 sigma, 2 sigma, 3 sigma, which are different levels of confidence. Okay, so yes, it's highly dangerous to hold 100% or to target 100% stock level, and that's because of what I've just said in terms of the levels of stock holding. So what you are doing, if you want to target 100% service level, you have to, in theory, hold enough stock everywhere to satisfy every consumer demand. So every consumer that goes into every store, everywhere, must be able to find that product on shelf. So if you just take that back to the amount of stock that the company has to hold, you can understand why it's so dangerous, because it just ties up money. Okay. All right. So if you have a look here, and this is basically where we are, the cost of holding stock simply increases as your service level percentage increases. So I think that this is a very simplistic way, a simplistic graph that we are seeing here, but it's very indicative of what happens in terms of trying to achieve the highest service level against stock holding. So cycle stocks are those stocks that you hold in order to service your customer. Okay, so in terms of your cycle stocks would be this stock that you hold here in order to service your customer levels. Okay, your safety stock is that stock that is held at the bottom that supports your systems and is generally held in centralized locations. So if we ever get to the point where we are discussing supply chain systems and MRP, we'll discuss under the MRP discussion, we would go into cycle stocks and safety stocks in a high level of detail. But generally in MRP systems, your safety stock sits below your 0 stock level on your system. Not your physical 0 stock level, obviously, but it sits below. So if we're sitting at 0 stock here, your safety stock would then sit below and technically only gets used if you go below your 0 stock levels. Also, under traditional MRP, your safety stock levels don't get rotated through your system. So your safety stock levels increase the probability of perishable stocks exceeding their shelf life. So it's something that's got to be really managed very, very closely. And each one of these was introduced at a certain level in the life of MRP. As MRP evolved and to basically to what it is today, cycle stocks started off in the early 60s and 70s when it was MRP. You had cycle stocks only. MRP didn't include a financial aspect or a sales or a financial module or a sales module. It only focused on basically make to order items and a lot of project items. Your safety stocks came in the 80s when MRP2 came out, and your safety stocks and cycle stocks started working together as customer service levels and consumer awareness increased to the level that we are at now, where every consumer expects to go into the store and to have stuff available immediately. So I've touched on ABC analysis. It's a way of analyzing your stock and making sure that you maintain your stock levels to the correct, or your stock to the correct levels. There is a lot of legislation applicable to warehouses and factories and businesses in general. But in South Africa, your OSH Act is very applicable in terms of health and safety and environmental. In the UK, it's your Hasawa Act. Underneath this legislation, there's a lot of training, specific training that needs to happen. For example, working at height, handling personal protective equipment, working on automated equipment, driving of forklifts, how to do hazard analysis so that you are continually analyzing your systems that you're working within and your warehouses, how to do risk analysis, whether it be the base risk analysis or continuous risk analysis. All of that needs to be taken into account in terms of your legislation. I mentioned much earlier on the bonded warehouses, so that falls under your financial regulations, which are in South Africa is SARS, Receiver of Revenue, or the IRS in the US. I'm not quite sure what they call it in the UK. So all of that works together. In conclusion, I think we can all agree that warehouses need very high levels of planning and scheduling. We need to make sure that in order to be efficient, we use the latest software, we use the correct level of processing power, we use the correct data links, we make sure that where we are using Wi-Fi, for example, that our Wi-Fi systems are functioning, that our systems can operate at all times. An example of not operating at all times, and I'll get into this on Wednesday a bit more, for example, is when you shut down and do your month-end rollovers from a financial perspective. Generally, certain systems don't allow you to transact while you're doing your financial rollovers, which effectively means your environment comes to a halt, unless you do it manually outside the system, and then you have to come back into the system and actually then capture a whole lot of the information. So to support the legislation, you need your processes and your procedures have to be up to date. Okay, oh, thanks very much. In the UK, it's your HMRC. I'm not quite sure what that stands for, but obviously health will be one of the words. Yeah, and then a high level of training is applicable to all members of staff. I know this module is targeted at management, but as a manager, if you train your staff in the bigger picture and the understanding of business and how business runs and how warehouses fit into the business and how the warehouses run internally, you can save yourself a lot of pain and save your company a huge amount of money. And for tonight, that's it. On Wednesday, we will start looking at technology in the warehouses, and we will look at all levels of technology that we use. So I know I haven't given you much time, but for those of you who did post questions, I hope I've answered them as accurately as possible. Thank you very much for attending and for listening. I see all 12 of you are still here, so hopefully we got something right tonight. Yeah, Truman, do you want to add anything in at this point?
Thank you, Dave.